The name I use now is Arthur Klein. It's a simple name, forgettable. I bought it along with a birth certificate and a fabricated past from a man in Brussels back in 1948. It has served me well. It has kept me safe. My home is a small adobe house at the end of a long dirt road in the Arizona desert. Out here, the silence is a physical presence. It presses in on you from a sky so vast and choked with stars, it feels like you could fall upward into it. It is a good place to be forgotten. But a man cannot outrun his own memory, not even in the heart of nowhere. My real name is Klaus Richter. I was born in Munich in the spring of 1927 into a world that was about to burn. And I am making this recording, speaking into the microphone of this old machine, because the silence of the desert has finally failed me. It no longer drowns out the echoes. In fact, it amplifies them. The low hum of the refrigerator becomes the thrum of a machine that should not exist. The whistle of the wind through the canyon becomes the whisper of voices I have not heard in 80 years. Voices that were never human to begin with. I am 98 years old, a relic. I have outlived the monsters I worked for, the few good men I knew, and the woman I loved. I have outlived my own sins in a way, but I have not outlived the consequences of them. The history you have been taught is a lie, a comfortable, sanitized version of the truth. You are told that the Second World War was a conflict of men and machines, of ideology and industry. It was, but it was also something else entirely. You were never told about the silent partners of the Third Reich. You were never told how close we came to a victory so absolute it would have shattered the very notion of human freedom. I was there, not as a soldier, but as something far more dangerous. A believer in science. In the autumn of 1943, I was a prodigy at the University of Heidelberg, a doctoral candidate in theoretical particle physics at the age of 16. My mind was a world of equations, of elegant abstract truths. I cared little for the politics of the day. The war was a distant noise, a problem for other men. My mistake was publishing a paper, a purely theoretical work on zero-point energy fields. It was arrogant, it was brilliant, and it was noticed. One rainy Tuesday, two men in the severe black uniforms of the Schutzstaffel, the SS, came to my dormitory. They were polite, their smiles thin and cold as razor wire. They spoke of duty, of serving the fatherland with my unique gifts. It wasn't a request. My life as Klaus Richter, the academic, ended that day. My new life as a tool of the Reich had begun. They took me on a long train journey south into the mountains of Bavaria. From there, a black windowless car drove for hours, climbing higher into the forests. The destination was a place that did not appear on any map, Wewelsburg Castle. From the outside, it was a relic of a bygone age. But beneath its ancient stones, in the cold, excavated earth lay the future. Our facility was designated Sonderprojekt WG, Wunderwaffengerät, the Wonder Weapon Device Project. It was the black heart of the Reich's scientific ambitions. The laboratory was a cathedral of forbidden science, a cavernous space filled with technology that defied everything I knew. Coils of polished copper pulsed with a light that wasn't electricity. Magnetic fields so powerful they warped the air around them held metallic objects suspended in perfect stillness. The hum was the first thing you noticed, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to permeate everything, a sound that vibrated deep in your bones and made the fillings in your teeth ache. My superior, SS Oberfuhrer Schmidt, gave me a tour. He was a man with a face like a clenched fist, his eyes devoid of anything but ambition. He showed me the work of the other teams. The metallurgists were forging alloys from elements I didn't recognize, creating metals that were lighter than aluminum but could withstand temperatures that would vaporize tungsten. The biologists were studying cellular regeneration with terrifying success. But all of this impossible science was in service to the main project, the centerpiece of the entire facility. Schmidt led me to a central chamber, a circular room shielded by meters of lead and concrete. Inside, in a vacuum-sealed containment field, was the object they called die Granat, the garnet. It was a shard of dark, crystalline material, no bigger than a man's heart. It floated, unsupported, rotating on an invisible axis. It wasn't black, it was a deep, impossible crimson, and it seemed to drink the light from the room. A soft internal glow pulsed within it, in time with the hum that filled the labs. "It is the power source," Schmidt said, his voice laced with a reverence that was almost religious. "It generates a stable, self-sustaining singularity. It bends space-time. With it, Dr. Richter, we will not just win the war, we will rewrite the laws of God." I was a physicist. What he described was an impossibility, a fantasy, yet it floated right before my eyes. "Where?" I stammered, my scientific curiosity overriding my fear. "Where did it come from?" Schmidt's cold smile returned. "It was a gift, Doctor. A down payment for a future partnership. From patrons who saw the Führer's vision for a new world order and wished to invest." That night I was taken to a level of the facility I didn't know existed, level Omega. The guards here were different. They didn't carry rifles. They held sleek metallic wands that shimmered with a contained energy. The air was frigid, sterile. We stopped before a massive circular door made of a single, seamless piece of black metal covered with symbols that were not letters, not runes, not anything from human history. Schmidt placed his palm on a panel next to the door. The symbols glowed, and with a hiss of displaced air, the great door slid open. "Your work on zero-point fields has been noticed," Schmidt said, his voice low. "Our patrons were very specific. They require a mind that can understand the energy matrix of the garnet. But before you can work with their gift, you must meet them. It is time for you to see the true architects of our future. It is time for you to meet the consultants." He guided me into the room. It was stark white, circular, and bathed in a cold, shadowless light that came from no visible source. And in the center of the room, they stood. 2 of them. They were tall, at least 3 meters, and impossibly slender, their limbs elongated like the branches of a dying tree. Their skin was the color of polished obsidian, a perfect black that seemed to absorb the very light around them. They wore nothing. They had no discernible faces, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, only a smooth, featureless expanse where a face should be. And the hum that permeated the entire facility originated from them. It was their presence, their energy. They turned their faceless heads toward me in perfect synchrony, and though they had no eyes, I felt their gaze. It was not a look, it was an intrusion. A wave of cold, analytical thought washed over me, dissecting my mind, my memories, my knowledge, my fear. They were not speaking, but I could hear them in the core of my being. The voice was not a sound. It was a torrent of pure information, of complex equations, of alien geometries, and of a single, horrifying, absolute truth that bloomed in my mind. They had given us the garnet. They were the source of all our impossible science. And in return for a swift and total victory, Hitler had promised them the earth and everything on it. We were not building a weapon to save Germany. We were building the key to our own cage.
The moments after that first encounter are a blur of cold shock. I remember Oberfuhrer Schmidt guiding me out of the white chamber, his grip on my arm as firm and impersonal as a steel clamp. The great black door hissed shut behind us, sealing the consultants away in their sterile, silent world. I was trembling, my mind a screaming chaos of alien geometries and the horrifying revelation of our bargain. I think I tried to speak, to ask a question, but my throat was tight with terror. Schmidt seemed to notice my distress, but not in the way a normal man would. He saw it as a symptom, a predictable side effect of a necessary procedure. "Breathe, Dr. Richter," he said, his voice flat. "The disorientation will pass. You have just been briefed. Consider it the most efficient transfer of information in human history." He led me back to the main laboratory level, the familiar hum of the garnet now sounding like a purr of contentment. It felt malevolent, alive. He stopped in front of a heavy steel door I hadn't noticed before. "This will be your new workspace. You will report directly to me and only to me. What you learn in here, what you build in here, will never be spoken of outside these walls. You are no longer just a physicist, Doctor. You are an interpreter, a bridge between worlds." My new laboratory was small, Spartan, and isolated from the rest of the facility. The only significant piece of equipment was a smaller version of the containment field from the main lab, and within it, a tiny sand grain-sized fragment of the garnet hovered, glowing with the same crimson light. My task, as the mental briefing from the consultants had made brutally clear, was to learn its language. I was to build an interface, a device that could translate human commands into the frequencies that control the artifact. I was to teach a machine how to speak to a god. The work was unlike any science I had ever known. There were no textbooks, no precedents, no theories to build upon. There was only the knowledge that had been forced into my mind. The communication with the consultants became a regular occurrence. Twice a week, I would be escorted down to level Omega. I would stand before them in that white, shadowless room, and they would pour information into my consciousness. It was not a conversation, it was a deluge. Complex schematics for electronics that had no earthly business existing in 1943. Mathematical principles that contradicted Einstein's work but were, I could see, undeniably true. Star charts of constellations that could not be seen from our planet. Each session left me weaker than the last. I would return to my lab with a splitting headache and blood streaming from my nose, the alien equations swirling behind my eyelids. I would dream of black, silent ships falling through the void between galaxies, of dying suns, and of worlds that have been silenced, their surfaces turned to glass. I was their student, but I felt more like a specimen they were dissecting layer by layer. They were not teaching me because they wanted an ally. They were programming a tool. The purpose of my work was a project named Diglocka, the Bell. The name was a deception, meant to sound like some primitive acoustic weapon. The reality was infinitely more sinister. The garnet, I was beginning to understand, did not simply generate energy. It was a quantum tuning fork. It could manipulate the very fabric of reality at a subatomic level. It could be programmed to resonate with the unique quantum signature of any type of matter, steel, stone, water, flesh, and by creating a counter frequency, simply unmake it. Erase it from existence as if it had never been. Diglocka was not a bomb that would destroy a city with fire and force. It was a weapon that would convince a city it had never existed in the first place. The silence it would leave behind would be the most terrifying sound of all. A part of me was horrified. The moral implications were monstrous. This was a weapon not for a soldier, but for a god who had grown tired of his creation. But there was another part of me, the scientist, the prodigy from Heidelberg, that was utterly and completely captivated. I was learning the grammar of creation itself. The secrets the aliens fed into my mind were the most beautiful, elegant truths I had ever encountered. The temptation was overwhelming to see those equations take form, to prove their impossible theories, to be the first human to command reality itself. It was a siren song for my intellect, and I was steering my ship directly towards the rocks. I started to notice things, small inconsistencies that troubled me. Sometimes the information they gave me would contain a deliberate flaw, a paradox in an equation, as if they were testing my ability to find it. When I would correct it in my designs, I would feel a wave of what? Approval? Acknowledgement? It was like a lab animal solving a puzzle. At other times, I would get fleeting flashes of their own thoughts, unintended leaks in the data stream. I saw a sky with two suns. I felt an emotion that had no human name, a feeling of cosmic loneliness, an infinite, patient hunger. I began to suspect that we were not the first civilization they had assisted. We were just the latest in a long, silent line of worlds they had cultivated for their own mysterious purpose. After 6 months of relentless work, sleeping in my lab, forgetting the taste of real food, forgetting the warmth of the sun, I had a breakthrough. I had constructed the first prototype of the interface, a complex array of vacuum tubes, magnetic coils, and wiring that looked laughably primitive next to the single perfect shard of alien technology it was meant to control. Schmidt and a handful of SS generals, their faces grim and expectant, stood behind a lead glass shield as I initiated the first test. The target was a solid block of lead, 1 cubic meter, sitting in a sealed chamber. I took a deep breath, the smell of ozone and hot electronics filling my lungs. I calibrated the frequencies on my console, my fingers moving with a certainty that did not feel like my own. I was translating a thought into a command. The thought was lead. The command was cease, to be. I engaged the sequence. There was no explosion, no flash of light. For a terrifying second, nothing happened at all. Then the low hum of the garnet fragment intensified into a sharp, piercing tone. The air in the test chamber shimmered, warped, like heat haze on a summer road. The lead block did not melt or vaporize. It just faded. It became translucent, then transparent, then it was simply gone. Not destroyed, erased. The sensors in the chamber confirmed it. The space where the lead had been was now a perfect vacuum. 1 cubic meter of reality had been scooped out of the world. The generals behind the glass were speechless, their faces a mixture of awe and naked ambition. Schmidt turned to me, and for the first time his cold eyes held a flicker of something that looked like triumph. Gott im Himmel, one of the generals whispered. God in heaven. Schmidt's smile was thin and sharp. God has nothing to do with this. I looked at the empty space in the chamber, and then at my own trembling hands. I had not summoned God. I had just learned to speak the language of the things that devour worlds. And I was terrified that I was beginning to like it.
The success of that first test changed everything. The silence it left in the test chamber was replaced by a storm of activity throughout the facility. Our project was no longer just a priority. It was the singular obsession of the Reich's inner circle.
Resources became infinite. Whatever I asked for, rare earth metals, specialized vacuum tubes, industrial diamonds, appeared within days, procured from the far corners of conquered Europe. The hum in the subterranean levels grew deeper, louder, as more and more alien technology was brought online. The atmosphere shifted from one of secretive research to the grim, focused energy of a weapon being readied for war. And I, Klaus Richter, the boy wonder from Heidelberg, was the high priest of this new, terrible religion. The pressure became immense. Oberfuhrer Schmidt was a constant presence, his cold eyes watching my every calculation, his questions sharp and precise. Sleep became a luxury, then a memory. My world shrunk to the confines of my laboratory, to the crimson glow of the garnet fragment and the beautiful, lethal equations that it whispered into my mind. I was more machine than man, a living cog in an engine whose purpose I was beginning to dread. It was during this time that they brought in Dr. Anneliese Hahn. She was a biologist from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, a specialist in cellular biochemistry. She was brilliant, with sharp, inquisitive eyes that seemed to see more than she let on. She was assigned to Project Chimera, a subsection of my work. Her official task was to catalog the unique quantum signatures of various forms of organic matter. It was a sterile, scientific description for a gruesome task. She was mapping the resonant frequencies of life itself. At first, her presence was a relief. She was a fellow academic, someone who spoke the language of science, not military orders. In the sterile chill of the Wewelsburg underground, she was a spark of intellectual warmth. "Your work, it's a new field of physics entirely," she said to me one evening as we shared a meager meal in the canteen. "It violates the conservation of energy, Klaus. Where does the mass go?" Her question was direct, probing. I could only offer the official, sanitized explanation about shunting matter into a pocket dimension. It was a lie we both knew was a lie. Her eyes told me she didn't believe it, but they also told me she was smart enough not to press the issue. My own work drove me deeper into the alien mindset. The sessions on Level Omega became more intense. During one transfer, something went wrong, or perhaps something went exactly as they intended. The stream of data was overwhelming, and for a moment, the barrier between my consciousness and theirs dissolved. I wasn't just receiving information, I was experiencing a memory, their memory. Suddenly, I was not in the cold white room beneath a German castle. I was standing on a balcony made of living crystal, looking out over a city of impossible beauty. Towers of light and spun glass pierced a violet sky where two suns, one gold, one silver, hung like divine eyes. Graceful beings, tall and luminous, moved through plazas of floating flora. The air itself hummed with a melody of pure peace. I felt a sense of belonging, of profound tranquility. This was their home. Or rather, it had been the home of the beings they had replaced. Then the memory soured. The sky darkened. The melody of peace was shattered by a singular dissonant hum, the same hum that now filled our facility. I looked up and saw them, the black, silent ships of the consultants blotting out the twin suns. I felt a wave of absolute soul-crushing terror that was not my own. From the belly of the lead ship, a beam of nothing descended. It was not light, not energy. It was an absence. As it touched the crystalline spires, they did not explode or burn. They were unmade. They dissolved into transparency and then vanished. The beautiful city was erased, piece by piece, leaving behind a silent, perfect void, a wound in the fabric of reality. I understood then. The consultants were not allies or partners. They were a virus. They moved from world to world, offering their technology to the ambitious and the desperate, letting them build the very weapon that would be used to harvest their own planet. The garnet was not a power source. It was a tombstone. It was the compressed quantum echo of 1 billion souls that had been erased from existence. I was ripped back to my own consciousness, collapsing onto the floor of the white room, gasping for air, the afterimage of a violet sky burning behind my eyes. The consultants stood over me, their featureless faces offering no sympathy. The mental message was clear, colder than any word Schmidt had ever spoken. This is the price of power. This is the nature of order. I stumbled back to my lab, my soul screaming. A few days later, a visibly shaken Anneliese intercepted me in the corridor. Her face was pale. She pulled me into an empty storage room. "Klaus, I need to talk to you," she whispered. "My project. They've had me testing the resonance effect on live specimens. First plants, then insects." She was trembling. "This morning they brought me lab rats. I placed one in the test chamber and activated a microcharge from your device. It just vanished. There was no heat, no radiation, no ash. According to every law of biology and physics, it should be impossible. It's an offense, a perversion of nature." Before I could respond, we were summoned to Schmidt's office. He was standing before a large schematic of the full-scale Glock, which was now under construction in the main cavern. 2 SS generals stood with him. He was smiling. "Dr. Richter, Dr. Hahn, your progress has been exemplary. The Führer is most pleased. We are entering the final phase of calibration before field deployment." He tapped the schematic. "The device is tuned. Your organic frequency charts are complete, Dr. Hahn. Now we require a final set of data to ensure the weapon works perfectly on our enemies, and only our enemies." He turned to face us, his eyes gleaming with cold fire. "Tomorrow morning, a shipment of subjects will be arriving from Dachau. We will begin human trials immediately. We must ensure the resonance can be precisely tuned to specific genetic lineages. Your cooperation is, of course, expected." Anneliese let out a small, involuntary gasp. "Oberfuhrer, to use it on people, it is unnecessary. The animal trials provide all the data we need." Schmidt's smile vanished. "Dr. Hahn, your job is to provide data, not opinions. This weapon will save millions of German lives by ending this war in a matter of weeks. The cost of perfecting it is irrelevant." He looked at me then, expecting my agreement. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the blueprint of the weapon and seeing the crystalline towers of a dead world. I saw the faces of the generals drunk on the promise of ultimate power, and I saw the silent, patient hunger of our alien masters. The pattern was identical. The trap had been set, and we had walked right into it. Anneliese and I locked eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that shared glance, a terrible understanding passed between us. The scientific experiment was over. A silent, desperate war for survival had just begun.
Silence followed Schmidt's order. It was a dense, heavy silence, filled with the unspoken horror of what was being asked. Anneliese stood rigid, her face as white as her lab coat. I could feel the general's expectant eyes on me. In that moment, my mind was a battlefield. One side screamed for self-preservation, urging me to nod, to obey, to survive another day. The other side was filled with the vision of that crystalline city, of a world erased, and I knew that to comply was to become a willing executioner, not just for the prisoners from Dachau, but for all of humanity. I forced a nod, the motion feeling stiff and unnatural. "The data will be invaluable, Oberfuhrer," I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow even to my own ears. "The human biosignature is unique, complex. We must proceed with caution." Schmidt seemed satisfied. He dismissed us, turning back to his grand schematic of Die Glocke. Anneliese and I walked out of his office in lockstep, not speaking until we reached a secluded maintenance corridor, the air thick with the smell of ozone and damp concrete. She leaned against the wall, pressing the back of her hand to her mouth, her voice trembling. "We can't do it, Klaus," she whispered. "I won't be a part of it. I'll refuse. They can shoot me if they want." "They won't shoot you, Anneliese," I said, my mind racing, sorting through the alien equations, the schematics, the paradoxes. "They will put you in the test chamber. You're a biologist. You'd be the perfect subject." The color drained from her face. "No," I continued, my voice low and urgent. "We can't refuse. We can't run. There is nowhere to go. We have only one option. We comply and we lie." "Lie? How?" "This weapon," I explained. "It's not a simple machine. It operates on principles they don't understand. Only I do. Only I speak the language. And that means I can make it stutter. I can introduce a flaw into the grammar of creation." My plan was forming, born of desperation and the memory of the aliens' own tests. They had given me paradoxes, equations that were designed to fail. I would give one back to them. The next morning, the prisoners arrived. There were a dozen of them, men hollowed out by fear and starvation, their eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the camps. They had been told they were part of a medical experiment. The lie was a kindness I could not afford to give them. The first subject was brought into the chamber, a former tailor from Prague. Anneliese had to attach the biometric sensors to his body, her hands shaking so badly I was afraid she would give us away. I saw her whisper something to him in Czech, a prayer perhaps, or a promise. In the control room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Schmidt and the generals watched from behind the lead glass shield. I stood at the console, my heart hammering against my ribs. My task was simple: calibrate the resonance field to the tailor's unique quantum signature as mapped by Anneliese. The command was erase. But as my fingers flew across the controls, I didn't input the perfect, elegant equation the consultants had provided. Instead, I entered a modified version, one containing a recursive paradox I had discovered weeks ago. An equation that would essentially command the garnet to divide by zero. It wouldn't destroy the machine, I hoped, but it would create an unstable, unpredictable cascade, and scientific anomaly, a failure so spectacular it would demand investigation. "Initiating sequence," I announced, my voice steady despite the sweat trickling down my back. I engaged the power. The hum of the garnet fragment began, but this time it was different. It was a discordant, sickly sound like a bell being struck with a hammer made of stone. The air in the test chamber did not shimmer, it curdled. The light from the field around Die Glocke flickered from its normal crimson to a violent violet. The tailor in the chamber did not fade. Instead, his form began to flicker, to blur. For a horrifying second, we saw him as a young boy, then as a stooped ancient man, then back to himself. Ghostly afterimages bled from his body, tracing his movements a second before he made them. The generals gasped. The discordant hum rose in pitch to a piercing shriek. A wave of temporal distortion rolled through the control room. I saw Schmidt's hand raised to his face an instant before he actually moved it. I heard the echo of a curse a general would shout 2 seconds later. The very fabric of time in that room had become elastic, frayed. Then, with a deafening crack, the containment field collapsed. The machine powered down, and a cloud of acrid smoke filled the control room. The test was over. Inside the chamber,
The tailor stood, completely unharmed, but his hair had turned snow white, and his eyes, which had been filled with fear, were now utterly vacant. He had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. He was alive, but his mind was gone, lost in the echoes of his own timeline. Schmidt stormed over to me, his face a mask of pure fury. "Richter, what happened? Explain this!" I slammed my hand down on the console, feigning a rage and frustration to match his own. "It's a quantum cascade, a feedback loop. I warned you the human biosignature was complex." I started spouting technical jargon, a mix of real physics and alien theory I knew they could possibly follow. "It's not just their biology, it's their consciousness. It's creating a resonant paradox in the space-time manifold. The system is unstable. To attempt this again without understanding these effects would be insane. It could create a chain reaction that could erase this entire facility from time." The generals looked unnerved. The sight of time itself breaking had shaken them far more than a simple explosion would have. My lie was working. I had given them a problem that was more interesting than their solution. Schmidt stared at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, searching for any sign of deception. But I was the expert, the only one who understood the machine. Reluctantly, he had no choice. Delay the trials, find out what happened, Richter, and fix it. Annalise and I walked out of the quiet laboratory. A wave of exhaustion and relief washed over me. But then I felt a sudden, chilling sensation. It was a faint mental touch, a feeling like a cold insect crawling on the inside of my skull. It was a familiar feeling. It was the attention of the consultants on level Omega. There was no anger, no disappointment in the feeling. There was only a cold, analytical curiosity. They had seen the paradox I used. They had seen the temporal distortion. My failure was an unexpected result, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they were fascinated. I had not just sabotaged an experiment, I had sent a message to the monsters in the basement, and I was terrified that they had not only understood it, but that they were about to write back.
The weeks following the failed test were a special kind of hell. On the surface, things were quiet. The human trials were suspended indefinitely. Schmidt had me writing endless reports on quantum feedback and consciousness fields, theoretical nonsense to fill his files and appease his superiors in Berlin. He put Annalise and me in a new shared laboratory, ostensibly so we could collaborate on a solution. In reality, it was to make surveillance easier. We were watched constantly. Guards stood outside our lab day and night. Our meals were brought to us. We were model prisoners in a gilded cage, and the work we were forced to do was the performance of our lives. Every day was a tightrope walk. We pretended to be diligently searching for a way to fix the instability in Die Glocke. In secret, every equation we ran, every schematic we drew, was part of a desperate new goal: to find a flaw, a weakness, a way to destroy the weapon from within. We filled notebooks with coded data, hiding our research in plain sight within the dense mathematical language of the project. Annalise, with her understanding of biology, theorized that the weapon's erasing effect might have a harmonic vulnerability. Just as a singer can shatter a glass with the right note, perhaps we could find a resonant frequency that would turn the garnet's power back on itself. It was a sliver of hope in a sea of darkness, and we clung to it. The paranoia was a physical presence. We spoke in whispers, our conversations fragmented, punctuated by long silences whenever a guard walked past. We knew that one wrong word, one misplaced decimal point in our research would be a death sentence. But the fear of Schmidt and the SS was slowly being replaced by a deeper, more profound dread. The dread of what was waiting on level Omega. I could feel their attention on me, a constant, low-level hum in the back of my mind. They were watching, and they were waiting. The summons came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a soldier at my door or a command from Schmidt. It was a thought, implanted directly into my mind. A single, clear, irresistible directive: come alone. The mental pull was so strong it was almost physical, drawing me out of my chair and towards the door. Annalise saw the look on my face and grabbed my arm. "Klaus, what is it?" Her eyes were wide with fear. "They want to see me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Downstairs." "No, don't go. It's a trap." "I don't have a choice," I told her, and it was the truth. My own feet felt like they were no longer under my control. The guards outside the elevator to level Omega did not challenge me. They simply stepped aside, their faces pale, refusing to meet my eyes. The elevator descended in complete silence, and I was delivered once again to the great black door. It slid open before I reached it. Inside the white room, the two consultants stood waiting. This time the experience was different. There was no overwhelming deluge of data. The mental contact was controlled, precise. It was a conversation. "Your engineered failure was unexpected," the thought echoed in my mind. It was a cold, flat statement devoid of anger. "The temporal cascade was a novel application of the paradoxes we provided. You demonstrated a capacity for creative reasoning. The others of your kind, the ones in uniform, they are blunt instruments. They see only a weapon. They are predictable, limited." I felt a wave of images flood my mind. Visions of Schmidt and the SS generals, their ambitions and fears laid bare. Then a vision of myself, working at the console, the alien equations flowing through my thoughts. "They are an inefficient vector for a purpose. Their tribalism and primitive ideologies are a tedious obstacle. We have grown impatient with them. You, however, you understand the beauty of the principles. You understand the true scope of the work. You are a mind we can reason with." A proposition bloomed in my consciousness, a deal presented with the cold logic of a mathematical proof. They would eliminate Schmidt and the SS leadership, silently, efficiently. All evidence of their involvement in the project would be erased. The war topside could continue to its chaotic, meaningless conclusion. In the aftermath, I, Klaus Richter, would be the sole custodian of their technology on Earth. I would be their emissary. With Annalise and a select few others of my choosing, I would guide humanity into a new age. There would be no more war, no more disease, no more dissent. Just perfect order, perfect efficiency, a world remade in their image, a perfectly managed garden ready for a harvest centuries from now. All I had to do was complete Digloke, not as a weapon to be used on an enemy, but as a tool for surgical, precise planetary management. To show you the limitations of your current masters and the scope of our abilities, we will offer a demonstration. Tonight, at 22:47 Berlin time, monitor the encrypted military frequency for the Peenemünde Army Research Center. You will see the difference between their brute force and our elegance. The mental contact broke. I was free. I stumbled out of the room, my body trembling with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. I found Annalise in the lab, pacing like a caged animal. I told her everything: the offer, the world they wanted me to build for them, and the demonstration. We found an old Telefunken radio in a storage closet and, hands shaking, tuned it to the specified frequency. It was a scrambled channel, reporting on launch preparations for a new V2 rocket. The voice of the controller was calm, professional, counting down procedures. We watched the clock on the wall tick towards 22:47. The air in the lab was so thick I could barely breathe. The second hand swept past the 12. For a moment, nothing happened. The controller's voice continued its steady cadence. And then, mid-word, the signal vanished. It wasn't replaced by another signal or distortion. It was pure, dead static, a complete and total absence of a signal. We stayed like that for hours, huddled by the radio, listening to the hiss of nothing. Just after midnight, other military channels began to crackle with panicked, chaotic reports. A reconnaissance flight sent to check on Peenemünde had found nothing.
The entire island facility, the launch pads, the research labs, the barracks, the thousands of personnel, was simply gone. There was no crater, no debris field on the water, no radiation spike. The island was still there, but it was bare, as if nothing had ever been built upon it. An entire military base had been surgically erased from the world. Annalise stared at the radio, her face a pale mask in the dim light of the lab. The aliens hadn't just sent a message. They had shown me their power. They didn't need our crude machine in the bunker. Digloke wasn't their weapon. It was our audition, a test to see if we were worthy of being the zookeepers of our own planet. My sabotage hadn't delayed them. It had gotten me noticed. I now stood at a fork in the road. On one path stood the Nazis, human monsters who wanted to enslave the world. On the other, the consultants, cosmic horrors who wanted to harvest it, with me as their willing shepherd. I looked at the hissing radio, then at Annalise's terrified face, and I understood that my war was no longer about stopping a weapon. It was about choosing which devil to fight.
The silence in the lab after the radio died was heavier than any scream. We sat in the dark, illuminated only by the dial's faint glow, listening to the hiss of the void, a hiss that used to be a military research center. This was not a simple demonstration of power. It was an ultimatum delivered in the language of cosmic horror. The consultants hadn't just shown me they could destroy their enemies. They had shown me they could erase their allies with the same cold, indifferent efficiency. They had handed me the devil's abacus and invited me to calculate the cost. Annalisa broke the silence. Her voice was a bare, trembling whisper, but it had a new, steely edge. They're offering you the job of zookeeper for our own planet, a farm, and when it's time for the harvest. She trailed off. She didn't need to finish. I know. It's the same choice they offered on that crystalline world. Order and exchange for your soul, and then oblivion. I walked to the chalkboard covered in equations, our lies for Schmidt and our secret labor. I stared at the complex formulas describing how to tear the fabric of reality, and I saw only the mechanics of a cage. We were trapped between two ghosts of the future. The first was a 1,000-year Reich built on the bones of millions. The second was a quiet, orderly garden awaiting its reaper. Both paths led to the abyss. Then we have to choose the third path, I said, more to myself than to Annalise. There is no third path, Klaus. She countered softly. There's no way out of here. We're underground, watched by the SS, and above us are beings who can make an army disappear. Then we will make a third path, I insisted, turning to face her. I saw in her eyes the same desperation I felt, but beneath it, a spark. The same spark that made her protest the human trials. We can't destroy the bell. The consultants won't allow it, and we don't have the means, but we can steal it, use it, not as a weapon of erasure, but as a key. A desperate, insane plan began to form in my mind, born from the equations I had learned, the vision of the Crystal City, and the cold logic of our alien mentors. Die Glocke bends space-time. It can be tuned to erase matter, but if you reverse the field polarity, if you introduce the right resonant frequencies, in theory, it might not erase a point in space, but move it. Create a brief, unstable wormhole, not a weapon, but a door. Annalisa stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Move? To where? Away, I said. Anywhere but here. It's our only chance. Not to escape the base, that's impossible, but to make the base itself escape with us. I pointed to the schematic on the wall. If we can trigger the full-scale Glocke from inside this bunker, tuned not to erase, but to displace, we could rip this entire facility out of space-time. Where it would take us, I have no idea. The other side of the planet, the orbit of the moon, or it might just tear us into atoms. But it's better than the choice we've been given. Our plan was an act of pure madness. It required perfect timing, access to the main power core, and a way past dozens of SS soldiers. We were two scientists. We needed a soldier.
and I knew who it might be. Oberlieutenant Franz Hauser. He wasn't SS, he was a career Wehrmacht officer, the old school, assigned to the facility's security detail. He was in his 40s, his face a road map of the Eastern Front, his eyes holding none of the fanatic's gleam I saw in Schmidt's men. I had seen the way he looked at the SS, with a barely concealed contempt. He was a professional soldier trapped in a den of ideologues. Most importantly, weeks ago I had seen him listening secretly to the BBC on a small crystal radio. He was disillusioned, a patriot who saw his country being driven into an abyss. Approaching him was a risk that could get us executed. But without him, our plan was stillborn. The next day, I cornered Hauser during his patrol route near a ventilation shaft where the hum of machinery could cover our words. He gave me a curt nod, his gaze weary and cautious. "Oberlieutenant," I began, my voice low but steady. "You fought at Stalingrad, did you not?" He looked at me surprised. "I did. What of it?" "You've seen an army die because of one man's madness," I said, pressing on. "You know what a lost war looks like." His eyes narrowed. His hand drifted towards the flap of his pistol holster. "Be careful, Doctor. That kind of talk is dangerous." "The danger is what's happening in this facility," I countered, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You think we're building a rocket or a tank? You're mistaken. We're building a coffin for the entire world, and the ones giving the orders, they aren't even human." I was risking everything on this one moment. I watched his eyes, trying to read him. He could arrest me on the spot, but instead, he was silent for a long minute, his gaze sweeping over the concrete walls around us as if seeing them for the first time. Then he looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw no anger or suspicion. I saw a deep, profound weariness. "What do you need, Doctor?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the fans. I didn't know if he believed me or if it was a trap, but I had no other choice. I had stepped into the abyss, praying he would step in with me. Our war for survival had just found its third and perhaps final soldier.
Hauser did not agree immediately. He was too seasoned a soldier to leap into treason. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. He was watching. I would catch his gaze linger on the SS officers, on the strange, non-human tech being moved through the halls, on the nervous, almost religious fervor with which Schmidt treated the project. He was seeing everything he had likely forced himself to ignore before. Then, late on the third night, he found me in the lab. Annalise was there, and we both froze as he entered. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a worn, folded map on the table. It was a detailed schematic of the entire underground complex. Not an official one, but a personal one, marked with patrol routes, guard shifts, communication lines, and most importantly, weak points. "Tomorrow night," he said softly, "a team of civilian engineers is scheduled for routine maintenance on the main power generator. Their security screening is cursory, and they are under my supervision." He tapped a location on the map. "It gives us a 20-minute window. 20 minutes, Doctor, to get to the main control room for the bell and work your magic. I can create a diversion on the upper levels to tie up the bulk of the guard force, but the path to the main chamber, you and Dr. Hahn must walk alone." Our plan was simple in its insanity. Annalise, using her biochemical knowledge, had synthesized a potent sedative from material stolen from the medical bay, enough to incapacitate the 2 guards outside our lab. Hauser would trigger a false sabotage alert in the ammunition depot, drawing the main security force to the opposite end of the complex. While the chaos unfolded, we would make our way to the main chamber of Die Glocke, where I would input the final command sequence to trigger not an erasure, but a spatial jump. The night before the operation was quiet and tense. Annalise and I checked the calculations one last time. The equation for the jump was terrifyingly complex. One misplaced decimal, one slight miscalculation in the energy balance, and we wouldn't move the bunker. We'd create a microscopic black hole at its center that would annihilate us in a millisecond. "Klaus," Anneliese said suddenly, putting down her notes. "What if the consultants know? They're in your head." It was the question I feared most. The feeling of their presence had never left. "I think they know I'm planning something," I answered honestly, "but they don't know what. They are arrogant. They see me as their pawn, their tool. They see my betrayal of Schmidt, but they can't conceive that I would betray them. It's illogical. Why would the insect bite the hand that offers it the world?" The next evening at 2300 hours, it began. A soft pop, a hiss of gas under our lab door, and the two guards slumped silently to the floor. Anneliese and I slipped into the corridor, hearts pounding. At that exact moment, a muffled explosion echoed from the upper levels, followed by the piercing shriek of an alarm. Hauser's plan was in motion. We heard the thud of running boots as guards scrambled toward the fake sabotage. Our path was in the opposite direction, towards the main cavern housing the full-scale bell. It was a vast, cathedral-like structure of black metal suspended by massive pylons over a deep shaft. At its base, the same dark red garnet crystal pulsed, this one the size of a car, its low hum vibrating through the very floor. The control console was on a platform overlooking the shaft. 2 SS operators were at the station. They were the only ones who had remained at their post. I looked at Anneliese. This was her part. She took a syringe of sedative and walked toward them with purpose. "Urgent," she shouted, her voice laced with panic. "Oberfuhrer Schmidt's orders. I'm to take blood samples from you immediately. We suspect a radiation leak from the reactor." It was a brilliant improvisation. In the atmosphere of alarm and paranoia, the mention of Schmidt and radiation worked perfectly. The operators, confused, complied. As Anneliese gave them their injections, they didn't even notice she was delivering a massive dose of the sedative. A minute later, both men were slumped unconscious in their chairs. I rushed to the console. My fingers flew across the keypad, entering the long, complex sequence. It was a dance on a razor's edge, inputting the spatial jump equation but masking it as a standard diagnostic routine. The indicators on the panel began to light up, and the hum of the garnet deepened, changing its pitch. And that's when I felt it. A coldness, a piercing, inhuman cold in my consciousness. It was the consultants. They had realized. They felt the illogical nature of my commands. Their silent scream echoed in my mind, not of anger, but of surprised outrage, like a scientist watching his lab rat suddenly begin to dismantle its own cage. Treason, the thought came, a spike of ice in my brain. Unacceptable. The walls around me began to vibrate. The lights flickered. The consultants were trying to intervene, to seize control of the bunker's systems, or simply destroy everything. "Klaus, hurry!" Anneliese yelled, staring at the ceiling as concrete dust rained down. One final line of code remained, the most important: the destination coordinates. But where? I had no time to calculate. I simply typed a random string of numbers, a mathematical scream into the void. I slammed my hand down on the large red Activate button. The hum of the garnet became a deafening, ear-splitting roar. The world around the console began to warp. I saw the walls of the cavern stretch like rubber. Anneliese reached for me, her face distorting as the spatial anomaly hit us. Then everything went white. Not just bright, but an absolute whiteness. Sound vanished. Touch vanished. Time itself vanished. We were inside the equation, inside the door we had built. And as the whiteness began to recede, I knew we had either saved the world or damned ourselves to a fate far worse than death. The return to existence was not gentle. It was a violent birth into a new reality. The absolute whiteness collapsed into a cacophony of screaming metal, blaring alarms, and the gut-wrenching sensation of gravity reasserting itself with a lurch. Annalise and I were thrown from the control platform, tumbling onto the hard concrete below. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of ozone and burnt electronics. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting the vast cavern in a strobe-like nightmare of light and shadow. Die Glocke, the great bell-shaped machine, was dark and silent, smoke coiling from its housing like a dying beast. My head swam, every bone in my body ached. I pushed myself up, my ears ringing from the cacophony. "Annalise?" I croaked, crawling towards her. She was dazed but conscious, a long gash on her forehead. We were alive. Our insane gambit had not atomized us. That's when we heard Hauser's voice, cutting through the din. "Richter, Hahn, status report." He was making his way towards us from a side tunnel, his uniform torn, his face smeared with grime and a trickle of blood, but his pistol was drawn and his eyes were clear. He was a soldier in his element. Chaos. "We're alive," I managed to say, helping Annalise to her feet. "The machine, it's offline. Did it work? Where are we?" "It worked," Hauser said, his voice grim, "but the cost was high." He pointed up. My gaze followed his finger and I gasped. High above us, the cavern's massive reinforced concrete ceiling had been fractured. A huge section was gone, ripped away, and through the jagged opening I saw not the solid rock of the Wewelsburg mountain, but sky. It was the wrong sky. It was a deep, bruised purple twilight filled with churning clouds of a sickly phosphorescent green. Hanging in that impossible sky were not one, but two moons. One was a large, shattered crescent looking like a broken piece of bone. The other was smaller, blood red, and seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. We stared, speechless. The alarms, the dust, the pain, it all faded away, replaced by the silent, soul-shaking reality of what we had done. We had thrown ourselves into the void, and the void had thrown us out onto the shores of an alien world. Hauser's report brought us crashing back to our grim reality. The jump sheared the facility in half. We lost the entire northern wing, the main entrance, the upper research levels, level Omega, all gone. Communications are dead. Life support is on emergency power, but it's failing. The reactor is stable for now, but I don't know for how long. He looked around at the dazed soldiers and scientists emerging from the rubble. I count maybe 50 survivors in this section, a mix of my men, SS, and your science teams. The chain of command is broken. Schmidt is gone. We're alone. A new and dangerous dynamic was already forming. The surviving SS guards, disoriented but still arrogant, were trying to assert control, barking orders that no one was following. Their power, derived from a regime that now existed in another reality, had evaporated. Hauser's Wehrmacht soldiers, loyal to him and hardened by real combat, began to form a defensive perimeter, their expressions grim and resolute. It was a standoff born in the ruins of our escape. "We have a bigger problem," Annalise said suddenly, her voice strained. She was looking at our old lab, which was partially collapsed. "The beacon." We followed her. There, amidst the wreckage of our work, was the small containment field housing the garnet fragment. It was still active. The crimson shard still glowed, but its steady hum was gone, replaced by an erratic, pulsing rhythm. It was a pattern, a sequence, a distress call. "It's calling them," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. We cut off the consultants, but we brought their homing pigeon with us.
We escaped the cage, but we were still holding the key that would lead the zookeeper right to us. As if on cue, a shout came from one of Hauser's men stationed at the main fissure in the ceiling. "Sir, movement, outside." Hauser, Annelies, and I rushed to the opening, peering out into the alien twilight. The landscape beyond our shattered bunker was a wasteland of black, glassy rock and strange, twisted flora that looked like skeletal hands reaching for the bruised sky. And in the distance, things were moving. They were not the tall, slender consultants. These shapes were bulky, hunched, moving with a loping, predatory gait. There were dozens of them, their silhouettes stark against the glow of the green clouds. They were coming towards us, towards the light and the noise, towards the beacon. We stared in horror. We had made an impossible choice to escape an unwinnable war, throwing ourselves across an unimaginable distance to save our world from two different kinds of monsters. But we had not found sanctuary. We had only found a new, uncharted circle of hell. We had crashed into a world that was already someone else's hunting ground.
The sight of the approaching creatures shattered our stunned silence. Hauser reacted instantly, his years of combat experience taking over. "Defensive positions! Barricade that breach! I want overlapping fields of fire!" he roared, his voice echoing in the ruined cavern. His Wehrmacht soldiers, disciplined even in this nightmare, moved with purpose, dragging heavy debris to form a makeshift wall at the massive opening in the ceiling. But the SS contingent, led by a severe scar-faced Sturmbannführer named Vogel, refused to listen. "We take our orders from the SS command, not the army," Vogel sneered, though his eyes kept flicking nervously towards the loping silhouettes. His men, about a dozen of them, formed their own tight, arrogant circle near another, smaller breach. "There is no more SS command, you fool!" Hauser yelled back. "There is only us and them!" He was right, but ideology is a hard thing to kill. Before the argument could escalate, the creatures attacked. They moved with a terrifying speed, closing the distance in a blur of motion. As they got closer, we saw them clearly in the sickly green glow of the clouds. They were like a cross between a wolf and an insect. Each was the size of a bear, with 6 powerful legs that ended in sickle-like claws. Their bodies were covered in thick chitinous plates like armor, and their heads were a nightmare of mandibles and multiple glowing red eyes. They weren't beasts, they were living weapons. They hit the SS position first. Vogel's men opened fire with their STG-44s, the sound of the rifles deafening in the cavern. The bullets sparked and ricocheted off the creature's armor. A few found purchase in the softer joints, and one of the monsters went down, screeching a sound that scraped the inside of your skull. But the rest of the pack fell upon the SS line with unbelievable ferocity. They didn't just bite or claw, they moved with intelligent pack hunting tactics, flanking them, one creature drawing fire while 2 others ripped through their defenses. A man was dragged screaming into the purple twilight. Vogel, his face a mask of disbelief, was swatted aside by a massive claw, his body hitting the concrete wall with a sickening crunch. Within 30 seconds, the SS defense collapsed into a one-sided massacre. The horrifying spectacle broke the spell of defiance. The few remaining SS soldiers scrambled back, their arrogance replaced with raw terror, taking cover behind Hauser's barricade. A fragile, desperate alliance was forged in blood and fear. "On my command," Hauser bellowed as the creatures, having finished their grisly work, turned their attention to our main position. While the soldiers prepared for the onslaught, Annelies and I raced to our ruined lab. The battle was a symptom. The beacon was the disease. "We have to shut it down," she yelled over the rising sounds of the attack. "I can't," I shouted back, frantically examining the containment field. "The power system is a closed loop. If I try to sever it, the feedback could cause the garnet to go critical. It could detonate with the force of a small atomic bomb." The beacon was drawing them, a dinner bell in the darkness. But what if we could change the tune? "The pulse," I said, my mind racing. "It's a low-frequency, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. It's attracting them. What if we could modulate it, overload it with a high-frequency signal? Maybe it would act as a repellent, like a sonic weapon."
It was a wild gamble, a theory based on a complete unknown, but it was the only one we had. "The power conduits from the centrifuge," Annalise yelled, as she already dragged heavy, sparking cables from a wrecked piece of equipment. "If I can bypass the regulators, I can channel a massive power surge directly into the containment field's emitters." "Do it!" I commanded, turning to a terminal that was still miraculously functioning. While Annalise, with sparks flying around her, jerry-rigged a direct power line, I began to write the most important equation of my life. A frantic, desperate piece of code designed to take the steady heartbeat of the Garnet and turn it into an agonizing shriek. Outside, the battle had reached its peak. The creatures were throwing themselves against our barricade. The soldiers were firing methodically, but their ammunition was running out. I could hear the metallic click of empty rifles, the desperate shouts, the wet, tearing sounds of the monster's claws on metal and flesh. "They're through!" I heard Hauser scream. I looked up just in time to see the largest of the creatures, a monster easily twice the size of the others, smash through the center of our barricade. It towered over Hauser, its mandibles dripping with phosphorescent slime. It was over. "Now, Annalise!" I roared, slamming my hand down on the enter key. She threw the final sparking conduit into place. The power surged. The Garnet fragment flared with an intense, blinding crimson light. And then came the sound. It was a high-pitched, piercing shriek that was both audible and psychic. It bypassed our ears and drilled directly into our brains, a needle of pure agony. We all screamed and collapsed, clutching our heads. But the effect on the creatures was 1,000 times worse. They stopped dead, their whole bodies convulsing. They reeled back, screeching in what was clearly unbearable pain, clawing at their own heads with their massive talons. The alpha monster that had broken through our lines collapsed, writhing on the ground before dragging itself back out of the breach. Then, as one, the entire pack turned and fled, disappearing into the bruised darkness of the alien night. Silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the high-pitched hum of the Garnet. We had survived. We had won. The remaining soldiers, Wehrmacht and SS alike, stared at each other, their faces bloody and exhausted, the lines between their factions erased by the shared horror. But as I looked at the Garnet, now glowing with a steady, piercing hum, I felt no triumph, only a cold, sinking dread. We had repelled the local predators, but our new, high-frequency broadcast was clean, powerful, and traveled unimpeded through the vacuum of space. We had shut off the quiet dinner bell. In its place, we had just lit a screaming, brilliant flare for the original owners of this technology, a flare that would one day guide the cosmic harvesters directly to our new, desolate home.
In the aftermath of the siege, a profound quiet settled over our broken world. The living tended to the wounded. The dead were given a silent, solemn burial under the bruised, purple sky. The lines that had divided us, SS, Wehrmacht, scientist, had been erased by the blood we shed together. In that alien twilight, we were no longer Germans. We were simply humans, a handful of castaways clinging to a rock at the edge of an unknown sea. Hauser, Annalise, and I stood before the softly humming Garnet fragment, the source of our temporary salvation and our ultimate doom. The immediate threat was gone, but the long-term threat was absolute. "How long do we have?" Hauser asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "There's no way to know," I answered, the terrible truth settling in my heart. This high-frequency signal is clean, unobstructed. It could take them 1,000 years to cross the void, or they could have a ship lurking just outside this solar system. We're living on borrowed time, and the clock is silent. We couldn't shut it down. The risk of detonation was too great, and as long as it remained active, it was a lighthouse, calling the locusts of the cosmos to our shore. In that moment, our mission changed. It was no longer about our own survival. It was about ensuring that the consultants never, ever reclaimed their technology. Die Glocke could not be allowed to fall into their hands again. Neither could the knowledge of how to build it. Our final act as a community, was not to build a settlement, but to build a tomb, a trap. For months we worked tirelessly. We rerouted the entire facility's remaining power to the main garnet in the belly of the full-scale bell. I reversed my own equations, turning the key for a spatial jump into a trigger for a controlled catastrophic collapse. We were turning the weapon into a dead man's switch. If the consultants ever returned, if they ever tried to access the power source, the entire facility would implode into a singularity, erasing itself and a cubic mile of this planet from existence, leaving nothing behind but a scar in space-time. Once the trap was set, all that was left was to live and to die. We lived out our lives in that strange, broken bunker. We watched the twin moons in their silent dance. We saw generations of the six-legged predators come and go. Hauser became our leader, a just and fair man who died of old age, dreaming of the Bavarian forests. Anneliese became my partner, my love, the one spark of warmth in a cold, alien universe. We studied this new world's strange biology, its bizarre physics. And 53 years after our arrival, she too passed away in my arms. Soon, I was the only one left, the last ghost in the machine.
And here is the final secret, the last lie of Klaus Richter. When I slammed my hand on that activation panel, when I typed in those random coordinates to save us from the consultant's wrath, they were not random. In a moment of desperate, terrified inspiration, I didn't input a location in space. I input a signature, the unique quantum resonance of a specific element in its most stable state, carbon-12, the foundation of life as we knew it. I gambled that the machine would take us to the place where that signature was most resonant, most pure. The jump did not throw us across the galaxy. It threw us through time. The bruised sky, the twin moons, the savage primordial predators. This was not an alien world. This was Earth, our Earth. We had jumped nearly 400 million years into our own planet's savage prehistoric past. We had escaped into the deep, deep history of our own home. I am the last survivor of that lost colony. Through a crude form of suspended animation, I derived from studying the regenerative abilities of this world's flora, Anneliese's final gift to me. I have slept through the ages. I have walked through the ruins of my own bunker as it was ground to dust by glaciers. I have watched the continents drift. I have seen the rise of mammals, the dawn of man. I have lived in the shadows of human history, an invisible, immortal ghost, watching you, my distant children, reach for the stars. I'm telling this story now because my long watch is almost over. For the past decade, I have been using what little remains of our technology to scan the heavens, and I have begun to detect them. Faint, intermittent signals from the void. The same resonant frequencies used by the consultants. They never stopped looking, and their search is finally bringing them here, to you. This recording is not a confession, it is a warning. The monsters I worked for were long dead, but the monsters I escaped from are patient. They are hungry, and they are coming. They lost our trail once in the deep past. They will not lose it again. So when you look up at the night sky, do not only look for wonder. Look for the silence where a star ought to be. And listen. Listen in the static between your radio stations, in the quiet hum of your electronics. Listen for a low, resonant hum, the sound of a cosmic debt finally coming due.